senators and all of them, then eventually when they grow, they will be favorable against the Islamic religion. Because they would have been raised from backgrounds of Islam. And this happened over years and over time. America began to be infiltrated by Muslims. Though outside the people were saying we don't want anything to do with Islam, but the American government, Muslims started infiltrating it little by little, little by little, little by little. Until one day, a young man whose father is a Muslim and whose mother is a white woman was born. When that young man was born, he grew up under the Islamic tutorship in Kenya. And he grew up in Kenya and he was raised in Kenya. And then when they saw that he was ripe for the deal, they stripped him off his background. They changed his identity and they gave him a new name. And then they took him and gave him a new ID and they sent him to the United States. Then in the United States, that young boy began to grow up in the streets of Chicago in the United States. And his real name was not known amongst the people. And they gave him a name called Barack Obama. So this young boy studied in America through the educational system. And they faked his date of birth. And they made him look like he was born in the United States, but he was born in Kenya. His mother was white. His father was Muslim. And then he grew up in the United States, disguised as a Christian, yet he was raised as a Muslim. They groomed him. They taught him how to represent himself before the American people and how he can sell himself to the black people in America so that he become accepted and voted for. And he sold himself, and finally everybody loved him. Everybody embraced him. Everybody said this is an ideal person. When he was asked what is his religion, he said he's Catholic, he's a Christian. But he's lying. He was a Muslim. But because he knew that majority of the American population is Christian, he did not reveal that he was a Muslim. But when he was behind the scenes and people did not see him, he will confess to those who are with him that he is a Muslim. But when he's in front of the media and in front of the TV, he will tell the rest of the people that he's a Christian by background. So what did he do? This plant that was placed by the deep state to become the president of America. For the first time in American history, a Muslim became a president. So this Muslim, by the name of Barack Hussein Obama, whose name already spells him, because it's an Arabic name, that this one is a Muslim, but he said, no, my mother is white. I'm a Christian by background. It was only my father that is a Muslim. I'm not associated with it. He denied it. So this boy, he started destroying America from within. He started destroying Christianity in America. He started infiltrating every level of government, every level of system together with the deep state. He was the perfect tool of the deep state to carry out the agenda. And because he was now the president of the highest powerful nation, Christian nation in the world, he misdirected the United States. He turned the United States against God, and he made it to become a regenerate nation, and he degenerated it, and he made the United States to be more and more sinister by promoting gays and lesbians, by promoting homosexuality, by promoting everything that was evil in the name of the country, so that God may turn his back against the country. So he took degeneration to the next level. What George W. Bush and Clinton could not do, Obama did it twice. He destroyed the country from within, and then strengthened the Islamic nations, gave them money. He sponsored Islam with American tax dollars, and he betrayed Israel. So when Iran was looking for nuclear weapons, Barack Obama signed a deal with Iran. He went to see the Ayatollah of Iran, and he pretended publicly that he was not agreeing. But behind the scenes, he signed the deal that Iran must get the nuclear weapons so that they can wipe away Israel. For the first time, America was betraying Israel under Barack Obama. There was hostility between Israel and America because Barack Obama had taken the seat of authority in America and redirected America to another direction, turning a Christian country to be an evil country. So what Barack Obama did, he strengthened the military of Iran. He helped Iran as a Muslim because he was so much in worship of the Ayatollah, because him as a Muslim, the Ayatollah to him was an idol. So an American president was worshiping an Islam leader for the first time. So what did he do? Which broke the arm of the camel, the back of the camel. So what he did, which then began to trigger everything wrong. Barack Obama signed a treaty with Iran, and he gave money so that Iran may acquire the nuclear weapons. He gave them $1 billion through a private jet. He flew $1 billion from America, and he went to drop it to the Ayatollah in Iran. How can you say you don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, but you give them $1 billion? For what good reason? So Barack Obama began to take the money in America and he gave it to Iran. Sponsored terrorism in Iran. sponsored ISIS in Syria, and made sure there were terrorists everywhere. Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, all of those terrorist organizations, they all had one thing in common. They were all Muslims. Sponsored by Obama. He was the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world, Obama. You hear people say, no, not all Muslims are terrorists. Of course, not all Muslims are terrorists. But what we know, all terrorists are Muslims. There's not even one terrorist that is not a Muslim. All of them are Muslims. Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, all of those were sponsored by Obama through Iran, because he was giving money to Iran. And when he was giving money to Iran, he would say he wants to rescue Americans that are imprisoned by Iran. So what Barack Obama will do, he will send forces, American forces in the Middle East, and then he will tell the Ayatollah and the Iran regime to capture them. And when they capture them, then they will look for a ransom, for Obama to pay ransom. Then Obama will go and pay ransom and come with the captives and say he was just trying to free Americans by paying Iran. Over the years, Obama was doing that. Hence, Iran had a lot of money to bribe the world, to bribe the nations of the world against the church and against Israel. And for 47 years, the Ayatollah was preparing himself to take over the world. So Iran became a superpower in the Middle East because it was now backed by the deep state, backed by Obama, and backed by the New World Order, because it was an Islamic regime. It would perfectly execute their assignment. And when Obama did this, this is where the American military woke up. This is when the American military was so angry and they were ready to take out Obama from power in the middle of his presidency. They were ready to commit a coup in America. But one of the military generals told the rest of the generals to wait because there is a plan. So one of the American military generals went to approach Trump, because Trump was the man who did not join the deep state. He was friends with all the deep state actors, but he was not a member of the deep state and neither a member of the cult. And Trump hated what is wrong. So these military generals, they went to Trump and they asked him, can you please run for presidency? They told him that if you run for presidency, we will protect you and take power legally. But if you refuse to run, we will not have a choice, but we'll have to destroy this government and destroy Obama immediately. And Trump agreed that he was going to run for the presidency. And then the military of the United States retreated from committing a coup in the United States. And they said, we'll take the power legally through Trump. And then after that, we're going to come against the actors of evil. So when Trump was running for presidency, he was then protected by the American military, or else they would have already killed him. But what the American military did not know is that the mother of Donald Trump, she was an immigrant in America who came from Europe. And when she came from Europe, she got married into an American who became Trump's father. But the grandmother to the mother of Trump, where they came